This may explain the Johannine features in the non-poetic lines, but does not explain the Johannine features in the original poem. If one takes any of the many critical reconstructions of the original poem, even Schneckenburg's, where there has been a systematic attempt to rule out Johannine features, one is still left with a poem that is more at home in the Johannine writings than anywhere else in the New Testament. Okay? Now, this statement here is very, very, very important. In fact, the most important statement in the pericope that I've just read out to you. The Johannine features is not found or is dissimilar if you compare it to any of the synoptic gospel, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. If you understand the synoptic gospels and if you read books on the development of the synoptic gospels, you come to realize that the order of the gospel in the New Testament is basically incorrect. Okay, if we try to put it in a chronological terms. Now, the gospel, the canon, wasn't meant to be arranged in a chronological order, because that would mean Pauline writings would be first. Okay, the First Thessalonians would be the first book of the New Testament if we adopt a more chronological approach. And Professor Barry Wilson from Canada actually desired this approach, and but the gospel wasn't canonized in chronological order. But nevertheless, the development of the gospel was that Mark was written first, and then Matthew and Luke around the same time, and then John. The statement that Raymond Brown said here is very striking, because it confirms that the Johannine theology or the Johannine corpus came much later, meaning it could not have been written by John the son of Zebedee. Okay? According to Arrhenius, around the year 180, and Eusebius quote this as well, that the gospel was named according to tradition. In another part of the book, in this book, Raymond Brown actually argues that the tradition is actually a better argument to have than to be skeptical about it. For me, I have no problem accepting that the Gospel of John has something to do with John the son of Zebedee, but I reject completely, and majority of scholars today reject, critical scholars I meant, they reject that the entire Johannine corpus that we have today came from John the son of Zebedee. No doubt in my mind, and if you read the Gospel of John, we must give some weight to the traditions. Okay, we must give some weight to the traditions that the church fathers have. For example, Irenaeus say that he got this from tradition. However, in the around the 150s, when Justin Martyr was quoting the Gospels, he never say this is gospel according to John, or this gospel was written by John the son of Zebedee. In fact, Justin Martyr seems to be oblivious of the names of the gospel. Okay? However, 30 years later, 30 to 50 years later, Irenaeus, writing around the 180 or 185, towards the end of the second century, actually suddenly named the gospel. Could it be possible that Justin Martyr are not aware, okay, of the names of this gospel? And if he is aware, maybe he refused to quote. Now, all these are hypotheses, we do not know. But the evidence presents that the very first time the four gospel was actually quoted by name came from Irenaeus around the year 180 CE, okay, of the Common Era. There are many gospels written around this period. Okay, there are over, today we have around 40 gospels that are written, okay, including the secret gospel of Mark by Martin Smith, but that's a forgery, late forgery, I think a 19th or 18th century forgery. But anyway, that is what I would actually like to read to you. I would totally recommend you, Raymond Brown's commentary on the Gospel of John. It's a 3-volume work, and it's a very thick volume. But nevertheless, Raymond Brown's writing, I've read many of Raymond Brown's book, and I own many of Raymond Brown's book. And if you really want a very, very scholarly work, then this is actually the detailed commentary section in his writings in the Anchor Yale Bible's commentary series. Is just mesmerizing to read. The way he plays his arguments and the way he challenged the opinion of skeptics. Okay? But bear in mind, Raymond Brown is a Christian, or was a Christian. He was a Catholic priest. Okay? And so you do get some of his theological points in his commentary, but he always backs it up with evidence. Okay? For example, Raymond Brown argues that the tradition that Irenaeus quotes, okay, is reliable, and that the Gospel according to John does leads back to John the son of Zebedee. Okay? And I have no problem with that. Because Raymond Brown never claims that what we have today was written by John the son of Zebedee. In fact, he himself mentioned that could not have been true if you read his introduction to the New Testament, okay, published in 1998, 1997. And so, again, he wrote this in, I think in the 60s or in the 50s, I'm not sure, because it wasn't published by Yale. Yale actually bought the license for his commentary, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I'm mistaken. That is the birth of the Messiah and the death of the Messiah. I'm mistaken. But it was first published by Random House. But Raymond Brown writing this in, I don't know when, in the 80s or in the 70s. And even till today, his commentary is still valid, despite the amount of scholarships that have gone into. Now, obviously, he doesn't know the amount of the current scholarships, okay, because he has already passed away, okay. But even the current scholarship arguments, I found it a bit weak if you compare it to Raymond Brown's argument. For example, like the tradition, okay, the gospel, there's a tradition. Even though we have no evidence, okay, but there must be a reason why Irenaeus quotes. He named the 4 Gospels, and the 4 Gospels was according to tradition, so on and so forth. And there are such thing as the Johannine community. Okay, even though this word Johannine community is a scholarly made up, but there are the communities of early church communities, okay, that can actually be responsible for the Gospel according to John. Yeah, I have no problem accepting that. Okay, and in fact, that is a very plausible argument, a very strong argument even. Okay, and that the Gospel was written probably by the first century, yeah, by the turn of the 2nd century, the first of the 2nd century, because of the Gnostic influence in there, and because of the prologue that is different if you compare it to Synoptic Gospels. But also in John, there are certain parts of the Gospel. Now, this is why commentaries are very important, especially that of Raymond Brown's. There's another commentary. I mean, I will make another book review of this. But a New Cambridge Bible Commentary on John. This is the entire commentary of the Gospel of John, but this is a very brief commentary. If you really want a commentary that actually tells you which part of the Gospel of John is actually more primitive than the other, i.e. meaning it is much older than the prologue, and it is much older than some parts of the writings, because we have quite similar accounts, similar theological accounts if you compare it to Mark even. Okay, then you do need to expose yourself to commentaries like this. 700 pages for just the first 12 chapters. Compare it to 300 pages of the entire Gospel of John. So you do need to read extensive academic commentaries. This is volume 1. There's volume 2. I have volume 2, but it's somewhere in my shelf. But this is volume 3. Okay, this is another thick book. This is on the epistles of John. You do need to expose yourself to commentaries like this, because for me, I just find it enjoyable to read Raymond Brown's work. He's definitely one of my favorite scholars. It is unfortunate that he has passed on, because I would have enjoyed more of his writings, but he would have been in his 90s if he's still alive today. Yeah, so Raymond Brown, commentary on John, the Anchor Yale Bible series, and I just want to share with you the pericope that I've read to you just now. But just to end this video, I'll give a summary. This is what most scholars say, that the prologue was written after the Gospel of John. Even the Gospel of John itself was written probably by 2 authors minimum. One author possibly came from the early Johannine community, possibly in the 60s, around the same time Mark was written. Mark and Matthew and Luke was written. And then we have a redactor. A redactor, basically an editor. Okay, a redactor who came later on, who edited the gospel, and who possibly even inserted the prologue, probably around the year 100. Okay, and that is evidence enough to explain that our earliest manuscripts of John came with the prologue, because it has been copied earlier on with the prologue. And so if we put a dating of around 100 to 120 CE, that the Gospel of John that we have now, obviously we have about 200 year gap. There could have been a lot of editing and interpolation in the Gospel, but we do not have any earlier than P52, around the year 150, 120, 120 to 150 according to paleographers. And so that could actually explain why that Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, even Beza, but Beza is much later on, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus actually came with the prologue. Even if you read Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, again, no two are the same. Yeah, the gospel, they are not the same gospel in Sinaiticus and in Vaticanus. But anyway, I'll see you on my next video. My name is Arfat, and thanks for watching.